My name is Audrey Offet, and I am 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, my aunt accidentally sent me a short video clip from a family dinner I had been forced to miss because I was late at my office closing out month-end books for a client. I pressed play on my phone, expecting nothing out of the ordinary, perhaps a casual family update or a quick laugh. What I actually received was my entire family sitting around a dinner table, laughing hysterically at my expense, while my older brother called me a pathetic failure, and my mother casually dismissed my entire existence with a single line that permanently rearranged my life. For 6 continuous years, I had been secretly paying every single major bill that kept their lives afloat: the mortgage on the house, the loan on my brother's truck, my nephew's private school tuition, and my sister's apartment rent. And there they were, completely unaware that I was watching, deciding among themselves that I should be profoundly grateful for the privilege of being their personal bank account. I didn't scream, I didn't send a furious text message, and I didn't shed a single tear that night. I simply opened my laptop, pulled up my financial ledgers, and began doing the one single thing I am exceptionally good at. By the time the next round of monthly payments came due, every single person sitting at that dinner table would understand precisely what they had been laughing at, and exactly what their laughter was about to cost them. It was a cold Thursday night, late enough that every house on my quiet street had already gone completely dark. I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, eating reheated soup with one hand while reconciling stack of hardware store receipts with the other. That is my daily profession. I manage the books for 3 local small businesses in our town, and the heavy workload routinely follows me home into the midnight hours. My phone illuminated against the dark countertop with a new text message from my Aunt Carol. There were no written words attached, just a raw video file sitting on the screen like an unexpected package. I assumed it was a forwarded viral clip, or perhaps an early reminder about my mother's upcoming 65th birthday celebration. I wiped my fingers on a dish towel and tapped the screen. The display threw a cold, blue light up onto my dark kitchen ceiling, and the audio burst out of the tiny phone speaker before the picture even fully sharpened. It was laughter, a rich, booming chorus of familiar voices. I recognized every single tone instantly: my mother's low, amused chuckle, my brother Wade's loud, boisterous roar that he always uses after his second beer, and my sister Megan's sharp, breathy giggle that she deploys whenever she wants everyone to know she agrees with the loudest person in the room. The smartphone camera was angled across a familiar oak dining table that I had sat at hundreds of times throughout my life. It was from the weekly family dinner held the previous Thursday, the exact dinner I had been unable to attend because I was stuck at my desk finalizing a complex quarterly tax filing. They had simply gone ahead without me, as they always did. I leaned in toward that tiny glowing rectangle, turning the volume all the way up, my soup going completely cold at my elbow as I listened. Someone in that video had just uttered my name, and the entire table had erupted into cruel, mocking laughter. My brother Wade was standing at the head of the table holding his beer glass high, turning an ordinary dinner into a theatrical toast just to make himself feel important. He was actively performing an impression of me, hunching his shoulders over, squinting his eyes, and tapping his fingers furiously against an invisible calculator in midair. "Here's a special toast to our dear sister Audrey," Wade announced, his voice slurred with alcohol, as my family grinned up at him. 34 years old. No husband, no kids, just her little spreadsheet numbers. A pathetic, lonely failure who's really great at adding up everybody else's actual money. My sister Megan laughed directly into her wine glass. "Oh, Wade, be nice," she cooed in that patronizing, sarcastic tone people use when they mean the exact opposite. And then my mother, Lorraine, sitting imperiously at the head of the table, as she had done my entire life, lifted one manicured hand to quiet the room down, assuming the role of the benevolent matriarch. "Oh, leave poor Audrey alone," my mother said, her voice dripping with casual condescension. "She's fine. Honestly, she should be deeply grateful. At least managing our family's money gives her something small to feel useful about. The entire table broke open at that line, real, genuine, belly laughter. It was the easy, effortless kind of laughter that only occurs when every person in the room is completely convinced that the person they are mocking will never, ever hear a single word of what was said. On the edge of the video frame, I caught a glimpse of my Aunt Carol. She was laughing along with the rest of them, though her eyes immediately dropped to her dinner plate and stayed there. I sat alone in my dark, silent kitchen and waited for the painful sting of tears to hit my eyes. But the tears never came. Something infinitely colder and far more dangerous settled into my chest instead, something quiet, sharp, and perfectly level, like a master financial balance sheet that finally has both columns filled out to the exact penny. I reached out, tapped the screen, and frozen the video on the exact frame where my mother's mouth was still open around the word grateful. I stared at her face for a long time, then reached for the one thing in my life that has never once lied to me, my professional accounting ledger. Before you judge the actions I took next, you need to understand precisely who I am and how my family dynamic was constructed. I am a professional bookkeeper. I maintain the financial ledgers for a local hardware store, a busy veterinary clinic, and a small bakery on Main Street that would have gone bankrupt 2 winters ago if I hadn't personally audited their accounts and caught thousands of dollars in missing inventory that the previous accountant missed. I taught myself the fundamentals of accounting through sheer discipline, eventually formalizing my education with night classes at the community college while working full-time day shifts. Nobody ever handed me a client or a favor. I earned every single contract by ensuring my calculations were never off by a single cent. People in this town trust me implicitly because numbers do not possess emotional biases, fragile egos, or manipulative agendas. That is the arena where I excel. Navigating interpersonal relationships, however, has always been my weak point. Whenever I am deep in thought, I repeatedly click the plastic cap of my favorite pen over and over again, a rhythmic, metronomic habit that my clients gently tease me about. I was clicking that pen in the dark that night without even realizing I was doing it. I will readily admit to a fundamental flaw in my character, and it isn't emotional softness, it is the exact opposite. I have an obsession with carrying heavy structural burdens before anyone even thinks to ask for help. A bill comes due, I quietly pay it. A crisis appears, I solve it alone at my kitchen table at midnight without making a scene. I never learned the art of asking for help or showing vulnerability, so I compensated by making myself the one indispensable person that everyone else relied upon for survival. I foolishly convinced myself that being needed was the exact same thing as being loved. I am exceptionally good with complex financial numbers, but I am far worse at identifying people who treat basic human kindness like a free subscription service they forgot they signed up for. And my biological family had been enjoying that free subscription service for 6 continuous years. I simply hadn't printed out their final invoice yet. The financial dependency began with the house. 6 years ago, my father passed away suddenly from a massive heart attack, leaving behind the suburban home I grew up in and a mountain of unpaid mortgage debt that he had been secretly losing the fight against for years. The commercial bank began issuing the kind of formal foreclosure warnings that you keep hidden in desk drawers. My mother couldn't possibly qualify to refinance the property on her own. She hadn't held a job in over 30 years and possessed zero independent income. My brother Wade's credit history was an absolute disaster of defaulted personal loans and failed business attempts. My sister Megan worked part-time and had no verifiable financial standing to put on a bank application. So the mortgage lender evaluated the 4 of us and identified the singular person whose clean credit score, verifiable income, and professional stability made the mathematical formula work, mine. I sat down in a private office with a bank loan officer and officially purchased my childhood home. My name was etched onto the deed of conveyance, my name was printed as the primary borrower on the new mortgage, and my signature was affixed to every legal document that mattered. My mother got to remain in her comfortable home, host her weekly bridge club, and never pack a single cardboard box. That was my exact intention. I didn't buy the property out of greed or a desire for control. I did it solely so my recently widowed mother wouldn't suffer the public humiliation of losing her home the exact same year she buried her husband. Everyone in the family casually acknowledged that I had handled the house situation. That was the exact phrase they deployed at family gatherings, handled, as though I had merely called a local handyman to fix a leaky faucet. They would casually mention it to neighbors at parties. "Oh, Audrey took care of that little house paperwork thing for Lorraine." It was light, breezy, and treated as a minor footnote. Not a single person in my family over those 6 years ever bothered to ask whose name was actually printed on the legal property title. They deliberately chose not to know, because knowing the truth would mean admitting that the house no longer belonged to my mother. The story they preferred to tell themselves, and the town, was that Lorraine had heroically held the family empire together through sheer strength after my father's death. I quietly let them live inside that comforting lie. I remained the invisible footnote, who paid the monthly mortgage on the exact home, where they gathered every week to mock my existence. The house, however, was merely the foundation of their financial reliance. Once that precedent was established, the rest of their expenses flowed toward my bank account like water finding a crack in a dam. Next came Wade's commercial truck loan, when his second landscaping business venture collapsed and the lender was days away from repossessing the primary vehicle he needed to earn a living. Then came my niece and nephew's private school tuition payments. Megan dramatically insisted that her children couldn't possibly endure the trauma of transferring to a public school in the middle of an academic year. Then came Megan's personal apartment rent, after she separated from her husband, claiming she just needed 6 months to land on her feet. A 6-month grace period that quietly stretched into 4 continuous years. And then, of course, there was the steady, uninterrupted drain of my mother's daily expenses, the electric bills, the heating oil, the medical copays, and the annual property taxes on the very house I legally owned. Every single month for 6 years, the ritual remained identical. On the first morning of every month, I would sit down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, open my online banking portal, and execute the automated transfers. Click, transfer, confirm. Click, transfer, confirm. Wade's truck, Megan's rent, the private school, the power company, my mother's account. I never made a public show of my financial support. I never posted about it on social media, I never brought it up during holiday dinners, and I never once demanded an apology or a thank you out loud. I simply maintained their lives the exact way a person waters a houseplant, except the plant kept growing razor-sharp teeth. I maintained a dedicated, private spreadsheet file for each of them, tracking every transaction the exact same way I would monitor a commercial client account. But in 6 full years, I had never once highlighted the entire column and clicked the auto-sum button at the bottom of the page. Some deep, subconscious part of my brain knew that the total figure would act as an undeniable mirror, and I wasn't emotionally prepared to confront what was staring back at me. Calculating the grand total felt like acknowledging a devastating truth about my family. So I deliberately refrained from running the numbers, until the night my mother and siblings informed me on a recorded video that I ought to be deeply grateful for the privilege of serving them. I know what a rational person reading this is thinking. How does a smart, professional woman, a trained bookkeeper, who audits commercial records for a living, allow herself to be exploited for 6 continuous years? It is an entirely fair question, and one I have asked myself in the quiet hours of the night more times than I care to count. Let me be completely honest, I was not blind to their selfishness. I attempted to establish soft boundaries over the years. About 3 years into the arrangement, I sat down with Wade and gently asked if he could begin contributing even a partial payment toward his children's private school tuition now that his business had stabilized. My mother heard about our private conversation before I had even finished my afternoon coffee. She called my phone immediately, cutting off my explanation before I could complete a sentence. "Your brother is barely hanging on above water, Audrey. You are the strong, successful one in this family. Don't you dare be so selfish and make this entire family's survival about your personal ego." So I backed down and dropped the subject entirely. On another occasion, I suggested that the four of us sit down together for a formal family meeting to review our collective financial reality. The meeting I scheduled had exactly one person in attendance, me. I continued paying their bills, not because I was a fool, but because every bill had a human face attached to it. If I stopped paying the tuition, my 9-year-old nephew would be pulled out of his classroom in front of his peers. If I stopped paying the mortgage, my widowed mother would lose the home she had lived in for 30 years. Those weren't abstract numbers on a screen, they were real people who would suffer real-world consequences. And I was the only functional adult in the family who possessed the capacity to prevent that suffering. So I fed myself the exact same comforting lie that every enabling family member uses to survive. I convinced myself that beneath their superficial taking, they genuinely loved me. I told myself that their gratitude was merely buried beneath their own personal stresses. That was the comforting illusion I lived on for 6 years. And the video Aunt Carol accidentally sent me was an act of profound mercy for one singular reason: it permanently stripped that final lie away from me forever. I slept very little that night. But when the sun rose the next morning, I still brewed a fresh pot of coffee, because I am not the type of person who allows the ground to crumble beneath a standard Tuesday. I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and my fingers hovered over the master spreadsheet that controlled the recurring monthly transfers, the ones programmed to execute on the first day of every month like clockwork. The next scheduled transfer was precisely 19 days away. I counted the dates on the calendar hanging beside my refrigerator, and then I noticed a detail that caused the back of my neck to go completely cold in a way the video hadn't. The first day of the upcoming month fell on a Saturday. It was the exact same Saturday as my mother's formal 65th birthday party, a grand celebration held in the local church fellowship hall that I was personally catering and funding. It was the party where the entire extended family and half the town would gather to raise a glass to Lorraine Offet for heroically holding her family together through tragedy. I sat there as my coffee went cold for the second consecutive morning. And for the very first time in 6 years, I did not click the automated transfer button. I opened a fresh, blank tab on my screen instead. I pulled up 6 full years of master bank statements, account logs, and cancelled checks, and I began conducting an exhaustive, line-by-line audit of my family's financial history. I want to be entirely clear about my mindset in that moment. I was not plotting a dramatic, childish revenge. I genuinely wasn't. I was conducting a clinical audit. There is a vast, fundamental difference between emotional vengeance and an accounting audit. But by the time I finished totaling those columns, I am not sure even I could tell you where the audit ended and where the reckoning began. That weekend, I watched Aunt Carol's video clip 3 more times, not out of a desire to wallow in self-pity, but to meticulously audit every expression, tone, and reaction the exact same way I evaluate a fraudulent ledger. I scrubbed through the footage frame by frame in the cold light of my laptop, flagging each face. Wade was the loudest, standing over his beer doing his mocking impression of my work. Megan was the eager chorus, giggling on cue to stay in the family's good graces. And my mother was the master conductor, settling the room with a single wave of her hand before uttering that fatal line. She should be grateful. At least managing our money gives her something to feel useful about. She didn't even have to raise her voice to deliver the blow. And then there was Aunt Carol, holding the camera at the edge of the frame, laughing a second behind the others before looking down at her plate. I realized something that froze my blood. Carol had filmed that entire interaction, and 3 days later, she had transmitted the file directly to my phone. Whether it was an accidental tap of a finger, or the quiet act of a woman who was too cowardly to defend me out loud, but wanted me to see the truth, it didn't matter. The evidence was now in my hands. The strangest element of the days that followed was how completely normal my family acted toward me. 2 days after I watched them call me a pathetic failure on video, my phone buzzed with their routine, transactional messages. Wade texted, "Hey sis, truck insurance is due this week. Can you cover it for me? Things are a little tight right now." No greeting, no inquiry about my health, just a casual demand sent, as if to an automated banking app. Then Megan sent a link to a high-end dining table set costing $1,100, adding a note, "What do you think of this for my apartment?" What I thought was that she was asking my permission to spend my hard-earned money, without even realizing how grotesque the request was. Finally, my mother called, and I let it go straight to voicemail. Her recorded message stated, "Audrey, honey, have you finalized the caterer for my 65th birthday party yet? People are RSVPing, so don't leave it to the last minute. And please don't embarrass me by being all quiet and cold at the party like you usually get. People will be watching." I stood in my empty kitchen and almost laughed out loud. She had no idea how right she was about people watching. Not a single one of them suspected that the quiet bookkeeper, who paid for their lives, had finally sat down and started running the final calculations. I spent the next 2 weeks constructing an airtight, indisputable paper record, not an emotional rant, but a formal financial dossier. I opened a master workbook on my computer, creating an individual tab for each of them: Wade, Megan, the private school, the utilities, and my mother. I went back 6 full years through my banking archives, statement by statement, logging every single electronic transfer, cleared check, and paid invoice. I recorded the exact date, the precise amount, the recipient, and the specific reason for every transaction. I didn't round up numbers to make the total appear worse, nor did I add emotional commentary. I simply recorded the unvarnished truth line by line. There is a deep, unshakable calm that settles over a professional accountant when putting chaotic records into absolute order. The world stopped being a place where my family secretly mocked me and transformed into clean columns of numbers that either added up or didn't. I printed a test page, just to feel the physical weight of the paper in my hand, black ink on crisp white paper detailing thousands of dollars in silent support. Holding that page beneath my kitchen light, I understood that I wasn't constructing a violent weapon, I was building an unflinching mirror. And the most devastating object you can hand certain people is an accurate reflection of their own entitlement. On Sunday afternoon, I drove over to Aunt Carol's house under the pretense of returning a glass casserole dish. We sat at her kitchen table drinking coffee, and I allowed the silence in the room to do the heavy lifting the way I do with a commercial client who is hiding an accounting error. Finally, Carol cracked under the quiet pressure. "You saw the video, didn't you, Audrey?" she whispered, unable to look me in the eyes. I didn't answer, which was the most definitive answer possible. Carol tightly wrapped her hands around her coffee mug and admitted, "I saw your name on the sent file right after I hit send. I was too terrified to try to take it back. I should have stopped them years ago, Audrey. The very first time your mother and Wade started making those jokes at dinner, I should have put my fork down and told them to shut up. But I was too afraid of becoming the next person they turned on." There it was, the entire cowardly ecosystem of my family summarized in 2 sentences. Everyone was far too terrified of losing their place at the table to ever defend the person paying for the meal. I asked her softly if that video was the first time they had talked about me like that. Carol looked down at her lap and confessed, "No, honey. That's just how they talk about you every single week when you aren't there. The Audrey jokes are as routine as dessert." I thanked her for the coffee, stood up, and walked out to my car. I understood Carol's fear, but understanding someone's weakness doesn't mean you continue to let them bleed you dry. Carol had handed me the irrefutable proof, but she had washed her hands of the consequences. I was, as I had always been, entirely on my own. I decided to run a small, controlled test to observe how quickly their affection would curdle if the money slowed down even slightly. I deliberately delayed Megan's apartment rent payment by 3 days past the due date. Just 3 days. The resulting reaction confirmed every single suspicion I held. My mother called my phone within an hour, not Megan, but my mother, acting as the chief enforcement officer of their financial pipeline. "Audrey, what on earth is going on with you?" she demanded, her voice carrying that sharp, hard edge she deploys whenever she feels challenged. "Megan's landlord just called her. The rent is 3 days late. The whole family is talking about how incredibly difficult and cold you've become lately. Ever since you got busy with your little accounting clients, you've decided you're far too good for your own family." I held the phone away from my ear, staring at the speaker in absolute awe. 3 days late after 6 continuous years of paying every bill to the exact penny, and I was instantly branded as the selfish, difficult villain of the family. "Money was never the actual problem with you, Audrey," my mother declared with practiced condescension. "Your terrible attitude is the problem." I quietly informed her that I would handle the matter, hung up the phone, and sat completely still in the quiet room. 6 years of flawless, silent financial sacrifice had purchased me zero loyalty, zero respect, and zero defense at a dinner table. It had merely purchased me the non-negotiable obligation to keep paying on time. That evening, I walked over to the metal filing cabinet in my home office, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the thick legal folder containing the closing documents from when I bought my mother's house 6 years prior. I spread the papers out across my kitchen table beneath the overhead light. There it was, page after page, the formal deed of conveyance recorded with the county clerk, listing the legal grantee as Audrey M. Offett, the primary mortgage note listing the sole borrower of record as Audrey M. Offett, and the closing disclosures bearing my signature on every load-bearing line. The house that my mother proudly claimed she held onto through her own maternal strength, the house where my siblings gathered every week to eat free meals and laugh at my existence, was legally, entirely, and indisputably mine. I had been both the benevolent landlord and the silent victim of my family's contempt simultaneously. I clicked my pen once, set it down on the deed, and felt the final layer of emotional fog evaporate from my mind. I was no longer confused about what I needed to do. I simply had to execute it so cleanly that no one could ever distort the facts. The following morning, I returned to my master spreadsheet, highlighted the master columns for all 5 accounts, and allowed the software to calculate the grand auto sum at the bottom of the screen. I will not state the exact 6-figure number here, because the specific dollar amount is secondary to the principal, but I will say that it represented a substantial fortune. It was a comfortable retirement fund I didn't possess, several houses over, and far larger than even my worst fears had anticipated. Sitting there staring at that glowing figure, I didn't shed a tear over the lost money. Numbers have never possessed the power to hurt me. What broke my heart was the sheer amount of stolen time that number represented: 6 full years of weekend shifts I had worked, personal vacations I had cancelled, and life opportunities one had sacrificed just to ensure their bills were paid on the 1st of every month. My mother had stated on that video that I should be deeply grateful. And she was right about one thing. Someone in our family needed to be profoundly grateful that for 6 continuous years, I had never once bothered to calculate the total. I began executing my plan with clinical precision. The first small test was directed at my brother Wade. His truck insurance text was still sitting unread on my screen. Previously, I would have processed the payment within an hour without a word. This time, I waited 24 hours before typing back a single, cold line: "I am unable to cover your truck insurance this month." No elaborate explanation, no emotional apology, and no room for negotiation. Wade called my phone less than 4 seconds after the text delivered, his polite facade instantly vanishing into pure rage. "Since when are you unable to cover it?" He shouted into the receiver. "You've got all those little local businesses paying you. What are you doing, hoarding your cash just to feel important? Do you actually think you're better than us now, sitting over there with your stupid little spreadsheets?" And then, unable to contain his entitlement because the video had already revealed his true heart, he spat, "Don't act like you aren't the pathetic one here, Audrey." There it was again, pathetic, the exact same word from the exact same mouth. Except this time, he was saying it directly to my face over the phone instead of mocking me behind my back at a dinner table. I allowed the heavy silence to hang on the line for 3 seconds before replying softly, "Okay, Wade." And I hung up the phone. A single clear sentence, I am unable to cover it, had cost me zero emotional energy, but it had instantly dismantled his financial security. And both of us knew it. Following that call, my phone erupted into a continuous wave of dramatic family communications. Megan texted me, claiming I was being insanely selfish, and that Wade was struggling without me playing childish mind games. A distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years suddenly sent a message expressing deep concern about the family being torn apart. And then came my mother's heavy artillery, a text message sent deliberately in writing so that I would be forced to read every word. "After every single thing this family has done for you throughout your life, this is how you repay us." I stood at my kitchen counter and actually laughed out loud. After everything this family has done for me. I opened my master ledger and reviewed the columns just to verify that I hadn't overlooked a single transaction where the support had flowed in my direction. There was nothing. Everything my family had ever done for me fit comfortably in the blank white margin below the totals. I set my phone face down on the counter and refrained from responding to a single one of them. Instead, I pulled out a stack of heavy, professional manila envelopes from my desk and laid them out in a neat row on the table. I smoothed the paper flat with my palm. I knew precisely what needed to be placed inside each of them. I drafted a 4-part master strategy, committing each step to paper so I wouldn't soften when the moment arrived. First, I would formally execute a quitclaim deed transferring the physical house back into my mother's legal name, while setting up the existing mortgage for her to officially assume, ensuring no one could ever accuse me of throwing a widow out onto the street. Second, every single voluntary monthly payment, Wade's truck, Megan's apartment rent, the private school tuition, and the household utilities, would permanently terminate on the first day of the month. Third, I would hand each of them an individual manila envelope containing their complete, itemized 6-year financial ledger, alongside an official letter stating the exact date their funding ended. And fourth, the most crucial directive, which I underlined twice, I would refrain from engaging in a single shouting match or emotional argument. I would state my piece, deliver the dossiers, and walk out the door. I was not going to fight them, because fighting keeps you bound to toxic people. I was simply going to balance the ledger and walk away forever. I hired a local real estate attorney to formally draft the property transfer documents. She reviewed the title and explicitly warned me that while deeding the house back to my mother was simple, it would not automatically remove my name from the underlying bank mortgage unless my mother could independently qualify to assume or refinance the loan herself. If Lorraine couldn't meet the bank's income requirements, she would be forced to sell the property or find her own financing. I looked the attorney in the eye and assured her that I understood the consequences completely. I wasn't attempting to trap my mother. I was simply handing her the actual, physical weight of the house she had spent 6 years pretending she carried alone. The calendar had fortuitously chosen the absolute perfect date for the final execution. The next round of monthly payments fell on the 1st of the month, the exact same Saturday, as my mother's formal 65th birthday party at the church fellowship hall. My family had spent weeks building a massive public stage for her, inviting the entire extended family, neighbors, and local church members to watch me play the role of the dutiful, quiet daughter who catered the event and gave a speech praising my mother's strength. They had handed me a microphone, an audience, and a public platform. I decided to keep the stage, keep the audience, and keep the microphone. I was simply going to replace their fabricated script with the absolute truth. On the day before the party, I visited the church fellowship hall to inspect the caterer's setup. Wade was already there hanging a birthday banner, drinking a beer at 2 in the afternoon, holding court for a few younger cousins. When I walked in carrying a tray of glassware, he pointed at me and called out loudly for the room to hear, "Careful, everyone. Don't upset the family ATM. She's been awfully touchy and dramatic lately." The younger cousins offered uncomfortable chuckles. Megan was nearby arranging floral centerpieces, and when I attempted to ask her a quick question regarding the caterer's final invoice, she cut me off with a patronizing wave of her hand. "Audrey, nobody wants to hear about boring invoices at a party. Read the room for once." My mother breezed past us both, fussing over Megan's dress, completely ignoring my presence, as if I were a hired member of the waitstaff. But in the far corner of the room, my 19-year-old cousin Haley watched the entire interaction, her face flinching with deep embarrassment for how they treated me. Haley followed me out onto the cold porch of the hall as I caught my breath. She looked at me with genuine concern and said, "Aunt Audrey, are you genuinely okay? They shouldn't speak to you like that. It isn't funny at all. You're the only person in this entire family who ever actually shows up for me." Her innocent words nearly broke my composure, not because I was afraid, but because she was the first person in my family in 6 years to ask if I was okay rather than what I could pay for. I took her hand, looked her in the eyes, and promised her that I was better than I had been in a very long time, instructing her to come find me the following evening right after I offered my public remarks. Saturday evening arrived, and the church fellowship hall was packed with over 50 guests, extended relatives, neighbors, and church members. My mother stood near her elaborate birthday cake in a new dress, accepting compliments like royalty, telling everyone who would listen how she had heroically kept our family together after my father passed away. Wade was already slurring his words near the bar, while Megan hovered beside my mother, basking in the social attention. When the cake was officially cut, my mother tapped her glass with a silver fork, quieted the room, and announced with a grand, patronizing gesture in my direction, "I believe my daughter Audrey would like to say a few words now. She's the one who organized all of this, she's always so good at taking care of the little details." Polite applause filled the room as guests turned to watch the quiet, dutiful daughter deliver her speech. I stood up from my chair, feeling a profound, unshakable calm wash over my spirit. I didn't hold a champagne glass. I carried 4 heavy manila envelopes in my hand. I clicked the cap of my pen once, the single metronomic sound echoing in the quiet room. "Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate my mother's 65th birthday," I began, my voice clear, steady, and carrying to every corner of the hall. 60 years of life is truly worth honoring. But before we finish the evening, I want to present my mother and my siblings with a gift that is far more accurate than a standard birthday toast. I walked slowly over to my mother, holding out the first manila envelope. "Mom, this first envelope is for you," I said gently, placing it directly into her hands in front of the 50 watching guests. Inside is the official executed deed of conveyance for the house. That property has been held legally in my name for 6 years, ever since I purchased it from the bank after Dad died to prevent you from being evicted. Tonight, I am officially signing full legal ownership back over to you. The house is yours again." A confused, uncomfortable murmur instantly rippled through the room. My mother's practiced smile completely froze. "Along with the deed," I added smoothly, "you will find the underlying bank mortgage paperwork, which I have personally paid every single month for 6 years. The legal letters inside explain how you can apply to assume or refinance the loan yourself. You will certainly want to contact the bank first thing on Monday morning." I then walked over to Wade and Megan, placing their respective manila envelopes flat on the table in front of them. "Inside each of your envelopes," I announced to the entire room, "you will find a complete, itemized financial dossier detailing every single dollar I have paid for your lives over the last 6 years, every monthly truck payment, every apartment rent transfer, and every private school tuition check. It is all documented to the exact penny. I didn't round up, and I didn't add emotional commentary, I simply recorded the unvarnished truth. Wade tore his envelope open, his face instantly draining of color, as his eyes scanned his personal multi-thousand-dollar total. Megan stared at her folder in paralyzed horror, as she realized her 4-year rent total was laid out in black and white. For 6 years, I continued, my voice calm, level, and entirely void of anger, my family has repeatedly told me, and recorded on video, that I should be deeply grateful for the privilege of managing their money. So tonight, in front of everyone who loves this family, I wanted to ensure the public record was perfectly clear about who was actually carrying whom. My mother surged out of her chair so violently that her wooden seat tipped backward and slammed onto the floor with a deafening clatter. "How dare you?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unbridled rage across the crowded hall. "How dare you do this to me at my own birthday party in front of all our friends? You have always been an ungrateful, jealous, dramatic little monster who is desperate for attention." Wade jumped to his feet, crushing his financial dossier in his fist, bellowing, "You think a stack of paper makes you better than your own family, Audrey? You think you're better than us?" Megan broke into hysterical, panicked sobs as she stared at her rent totals, while the 50 invited guests, the neighbors, the church members, and the local minister, sat in absolute, paralyzed shock, watching my mother and siblings scream at me across a birthday table. I stood completely still in the center of their noise, feeling more grounded than I had in my entire life. I waited patiently until my mother ran out of breath, and then I spoke in a quiet, razor-sharp voice that forced the entire room into total silence. "I am not asking for your gratitude, Mom. And I am certainly not asking for an apology. I am simply informing you that as of tonight, I am permanently done paying to be your punchline." An elderly neighbor near the back of the room, a man who had known my father for 40 years, shook his head and stated audibly for the room to hear, "Lord have mercy, the pathetic one was the person holding their entire lives together." I placed the final envelope on the table, the master schedule confirming that every automated bank transfer had been officially cancelled as of midnight. I looked at my mother, at Wade, and at Megan, offered a polite, quiet nod, and said, "The monthly payments terminate permanently tonight. The house is officially yours, Mom. I hope it brings you everything you've told the town it represented." I picked up my coat, turned my back on their screaming, and walked calmly out of the church fellowship hall alongside my cousin Haley. Outside, the cold night air hit my face, fresh and clean. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and drove home to my own house, the small, quiet home with my name on the deed, where no one's entitlement would ever touch me again. In the months that followed, the absolute truth of their choices completely consumed them. Unable to qualify for the mortgage on her own income, my mother was forced to downsize her lifestyle drastically to maintain the house payments. Wade was forced to sell his truck to pay off his own debts, while Megan moved into a tiny studio apartment and secured a full-time job to cover her own rent. My professional accounting business thrived as I took on new commercial clients, bought back my personal time, and built a peaceful, independent life surrounded by genuine friends. I spent 6 years allowing my family to treat me like a disposable bank account while mocking my existence, only to discover that the greatest moment of my life was the day I finally closed the ledger, handed them their invoice, and walked away into absolute freedom.